So there I was, Zara Punk, running exactly 17 minutes late to my first day at the Galactic Consortium Academy for Advanced Sentient Studies. Yeah, that's a mouthful, isn't it? They really love their fancy names out here in space. I burst through the bio-sealed doors of Lecture Hall Omega-7, and every single alien head in the room swiveled to stare at me like I'd just farted in church. "Ah," said Commander Vex, the professor standing at the front of the room, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining algebra to houseplants. "The human has finally graced us with her presence." Commander Vex looked like someone had crossed a peacock with a filing cabinet and given the result a superiority complex. His metallic blue feathers rustled with obvious annoyance, and his 4 beady black eyes blinked in sequence like some kind of biological disco ball. "I apologize, Commander," I said, trying to sound appropriately contrite. "The gravitational flux in Sector 7 made my transport pod late." A ripple of what I can only describe as alien snickering filled the room. One student, who looked like a walking pile of purple crystals, actually made a sound like wind chimes having an asthma attack. "Gravitational flux," Commander Vex repeated slowly, like he was savoring the words. "Class, this is precisely why humans remain the newest and, shall we say, least sophisticated addition to our galactic community. They blame their tardiness on natural phenomena they barely comprehend." The crystal being chimed again. "Indeed, Commander. On Crystalla Prime, we simply phase-shift through gravitational anomalies. Elementary quantum mechanics." "Thank you, Thyman," Commander Vex said warmly. "Your people's mastery of dimensional physics continues to impress." I stood there, backpack in hand, waiting for someone to tell me where to sit. The front rows were filled with what were obviously the star pupils. There was Thyman, the smug crystal formation. Next to him sat what looked like a giant blue octopus wearing a graduation cap that had to be one of the aquatic collective. Behind them, a being with 4 arms was juggling what appeared to be miniature holographic planets while taking notes with a 5th appendage I hadn't noticed before. "Miss Punk," Commander Vex said, "the way you might say infectious disease, you'll find your assigned seat in the back row with the other, developing species." And there it was, the academic equivalent of the kids' table at Thanksgiving. I trudged past rows of aliens who looked at me with mixtures of pity and amusement, like I was a particularly slow pet that had learned to walk upright. My seat was between what appeared to be a sentient mushroom that kept apologizing for existing and a small reptilian creature that looked like it wanted to sell me insurance. The back row apparently was where they stuck anyone whose species hadn't figured out faster than light travel until recently. "Now then. Nan," Commander Vex continued, his attention already dismissing me completely, "let us return to our discussion of advanced theoretical applications in multidimensional problem-solving. Thyman, would you care to enlighten our less experienced colleagues about the 17-layer approach your people use for basic calculations?" Thyman practically glowed, literally. His crystals got brighter, as he launched into an explanation that sounded like someone reading a physics textbook while gargling math equations. The other students nodded along like this was the most fascinating thing they'd ever heard. I slumped in my uncomfortable back row seat and wondered, not for the first time, why humanity had been so eager to join this particular academic circus. 3 weeks into the semester, Commander Vex strode into class with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for opera villains announcing their evil plans. His metallic feathers were practically vibrating with excitement. "Students," he declared, "today marks the beginning of your final assessment. You will work in groups to solve one of the galaxy's most pressing crises." The whole room perked up. Even the mushroom next to me stopped apologizing long enough to pay attention. "The Kepler 442 system," Commander Vex continued, projecting a holographic star map that made the air shimmer, "is experiencing complete ecological collapse. 7 inhabited planets, 15 billion sentient beings, and approximately 6 standard galactic months before total system failure." Thyman's crystals chimed with what I was learning to recognize as excitement. "Commander, surely this is a simple matter of quantum flux realignment using standard 17-dimensional matrices?" "Oh, Thyman," Commander Vex practically purred. "If only it were that elementary." This crisis has stumped our finest minds for 3 years. The blue octopus, whose name was Glub, because of course it was, raised several tentacles. Commander, the aquatic collective has analyzed similar scenarios. Obviously, the solution involves controlled oceanic expansion to restore planetary balance. Fascinating approach, Glub. Commander Vex nodded approvingly. The four-armed perfectionist, who I'd learned was called Xeris, stopped juggling his holoplanets long enough to speak. My species, the tetrapods, have developed a comprehensive system utilizing synchronized orbital mechanics, atmospheric reconfiguration, gravitational field manipulation, and temporal displacement protocols. I blinked. That sounded like the most overcomplicated way possible to say we move stuff around. Excellent. Commander Vex clapped his hands together. This is precisely the kind of sophisticated thinking that separates the advanced civilizations from the, he glanced meaningfully toward the back row, emerging ones. The other students were practically bouncing in their seats, if aliens could bounce. They started forming groups immediately, each species clustering together and speaking in excited whispers about their obviously superior approaches. Now, Commander Vex continued, I expect nothing less than revolutionary solutions from you all. Remember, this isn't merely an academic exercise. The Galactic Council is watching. This could determine which species receive advanced research grants, which civilizations are deemed ready for higher responsibilities in our cosmic community. Feynman chimed something that sounded like electronic laughter. Commander, perhaps the developing species should observe rather than participate? We wouldn't want them to feel inadequate when they see what real problem-solving looks like. A chorus of alien agreement rippled through the room. Glub gurgled something about primitive minds and basic thinking patterns. Xeris added, their species has only just discovered quantum mechanics. How could they possibly comprehend multi-layered systematic approaches? Commander Vex nodded thoughtfully. An excellent point. Miss Punk, perhaps you'd benefit more from watching how advanced civilizations approach complex problems? I felt every alien eye in the room turn toward me, waiting for me to shrink into my seat and accept my place as the dumb human who should just shut up and learn from her betters. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and shrugged. Sure, Commander. I'll just sit here in the back and watch. Should be educational. The sarcasm went right over their collective heads, which was fine by me. Let them think I was intimidated. I'd spent the last 3 weeks listening to these aliens congratulate themselves on being so much smarter than everyone else, especially humans. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you a fantastic view of just how ridiculous everyone else is being. As the groups huddled together, discussing their brilliant approaches in voices loud enough to make sure everyone could hear how clever they were, I pulled up the Kepler 442 data on my tablet and actually started reading. Presentation day arrived with all the fanfare of an intergalactic circus. Commander Vex had invited what appeared to be half the Academy's faculty to witness his students' revolutionary solutions. The lecture hall was packed with aliens of every conceivable shape and size, all whispering excitedly about the intellectual feast they were about to witness. Feynman went first, naturally. His crystal formation literally levitated to the front of the room while projecting a holographic display that looked like someone had exploded a mathematics textbook in a rainbow factory. Esteemed colleagues, Feynman chimed, his voice resonating like a tuning fork, having an existential crisis. The Kepler 442 crisis requires a sophisticated approach utilizing 47-dimensional quantum matrices that integrated with hyper-complex logarithmic progressions. The display showed what appeared to be the mathematical equivalent of abstract art having a nervous breakdown. Numbers cascaded through impossible geometric shapes while equations twisted through dimensions that hurt to look at. Step 1, Feynman continued, clearly enjoying himself. Establish quantum anchor points at precisely calculated coordinates throughout the system. Step 2. Initiate controlled dimensional phase variance using 17 separate frequency modulators. I watched the faculty members nod along like this made perfect sense. One of them, a being that looked like a walking telescope, actually applauded. Step 3 through 47, Feynman went on. involve increasingly complex manipulations of space-time fabric, each requiring computational power equivalent to approximately 7 galactic databases working in perfect synchronization for roughly 3,000 years. Wait, what? What? The beauty of this solution, Thyman concluded, lies in its mathematical perfection. Every variable accounted for, every possibility calculated to the 17th decimal place. Commander Vex practically glowed with pride. Magnificent, Thyman. Truly sophisticated thinking. I raised my hand. Excuse me. Did you just say this would take 3,000 years? Thyman's crystals flickered with what I was learning to recognize as condescension. Yes, human. That's the minimum time frame required for proper implementation. Good things take time. But I said slowly, didn't you mention that the system has 6 months before total collapse? A moment of silence. Well, Thyman chimed defensively. Obviously, we'd work faster. Next up was Glub, who oozed to the front of the room, leaving a trail of what I really hoped was just water. His presentation featured detailed holograms of the Kepler 442 system being systematically flooded. The solution is elegant in its simplicity, Glub gurgled, his tentacles gesticulating wildly. Complete aquatic saturation of all 7 planets. We relocate the existing populations to underwater cities, transform the atmospheres to support aquatic life, and establish oceanic ecosystems throughout the system. The holographic planets turned blue as Glub's plan unfolded. It looked like someone was dunking solar systems in a cosmic fish tank. This approach, Glub continued proudly, draws upon billions of years of aquatic evolutionary superiority. Water is life, after all. I stared at the display. What about the species that can't breathe water? Glub waved a tentacle dismissively. They'll adapt. Evolution is remarkably flexible when properly motivated. Motivated by drowning? Motivated by improvement, Glub corrected, apparently missing my point entirely. Finally, Zurus approached with his 4-armed presentation that looked like someone had tried to build a mechanical universe and gotten carried away with the instruction manual. Behold, Zurus announced, his 4 arms moving in perfect synchronization, as he manipulated a holographic display so complex it made Thyman's math explosion look simple. The Comprehensive Systematic Orbital Reconfiguration Protocol. The display showed planets being moved around like chess pieces, while artificial satellites, space stations, weather control systems, gravitational field generators, and what appeared to be a small artificial sun danced around them in choreographed chaos. Phase 1 involves relocating each planet to optimized orbital positions using gravitational manipulation arrays. Zurus explained with the enthusiasm of someone describing their favorite hobby. Phase 2 establishes atmospheric processing stations at key strategic points. Phase 3 implements weather control networks. Phase 4. He went on. And on. And on. By the time Zurus reached Phase 27, half the faculty looked like they were developing headaches. The display had become so complex that planets were colliding with their own satellite systems. This solution, Zurus concluded with satisfaction, addresses every possible variable through systematic redundancy and comprehensive integration protocols. As if to punctuate his point, his holographic system promptly collapsed into itself, and creating what appeared to be a miniature black hole that sucked in 3 of his weather control satellites. Minor calibration issue, Zurus said quickly, frantically manipulating controls with all 4 hands. Commander Vex beamed at his star pupils. Outstanding work, all of you. This is precisely the kind of advanced thinking that separates evolved civilizations from primitive ones. The faculty murmured agreement, clearly impressed by the sophisticated complexity of solutions that would take millennia to implement, drown entire species, or collapse under their own mechanical complexity. I sat in the back row, quietly wondering if anyone else had noticed that none of these solutions would actually work. The room fell silent as Commander Vex's expectant gaze swept over the remaining groups. The mushroom next to me was trembling so hard I was worried he might sporulate, and the reptilian insurance salesman had started stress-shedding scales all over our desk. Well, Commander Vex said with theatrical disappointment, it appears our developing species have chosen not to participate. How unfortunate, though perhaps wise given the intellectual caliber we've just witnessed. That's when I stood up. Actually, Commander, I do have a solution. The entire room turned to stare at me like I'd just announced my intention to juggle black holes. Commander Vex's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, and I could practically hear the collective thought of every alien in the room. Oh, this should be entertaining. Miss Punk, Commander Vex said with the kind of patronizing smile usually reserved for small children who insist they can fly, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, perhaps you'd prefer to simply observe today's academic discourse. No thanks, I said, walking down from the back row with my tablet in hand. I'm good. The walk to the front of the room felt like a mile. Thymon's crystals were practically humming with anticipation, probably expecting me to embarrass myself and prove once and for all that humans belonged in the academic kiddie pool. I connected my tablet to the projection system and pulled up a simple diagram of the Kepler 442 system. So I began looking out at an audience of aliens who were clearly prepared to be either amused or appalled. I spent some time looking at the actual problem. I highlighted the star at the center of the system. Kepler 442 is experiencing irregular solar flares that are destabilizing planetary atmospheres and disrupting weather patterns. The flares happen because the star's magnetic field has been knocked out of alignment by gravitational interference from a rogue planet that wandered into the system. About 5 years ago, I pointed to a small object on the edge of the system that apparently no one else had bothered to notice. The solution, I said, pausing for dramatic effect, is to move the rogue planet out of the system. Silence. Lita's silence. Then Thymon started chiming what I was pretty sure was laughter. Move a planet? Human, do you have any idea how much energy that would require? The calculations alone would take decades to compute properly. Actually, I said, pulling up another diagram, we just need to give it a little push at the right time. The planet's already in an unstable orbit. A gravitational assist from a strategically placed mass at the correct orbital point would slingshot it right out of the system. Glub gurgled skeptically. A little push? You cannot simply push a planet. Sure you can, I shrugged. You park a couple of big asteroids in the right spot, wait for the planet's orbit to bring it around, and gravity does the rest. Basic physics. Ceres's 4 arms crossed in a gesture of obvious disbelief. Your primitive approach completely ignores the complex systemic variables involved. What about orbital mechanics? Gravitational cascade effects? Atmospheric disruption protocols? What about them? I asked. Once the rogue planet's gone, the star's magnetic field stabilizes, the solar flares stop, and everything goes back to normal. No need to move 7 planets, flood everything, or build a mechanical universe that collapses into a black hole. That last part earned me a distinctly offended huff from Xeris. This is absurd, Thymon chimed indignantly. You're proposing to solve a galactic crisis with what amounts to celestial billiards. Pretty much, yeah, I agreed cheerfully. Commander Vex stepped forward, his feathers ruffled with academic outrage. Miss Punk, this is precisely the kind of simplistic thinking that demonstrates why humans require extensive education before participating in serious galactic discourse. You cannot solve complex problems with simple solutions. I looked at him for a long moment. Why not? Well, because, he sputtered, because complex problems require sophisticated approaches, advanced mathematics, systematic protocols, comprehensive analysis. Or I said you could just fix the actual problem instead of building elaborate workarounds that take 3,000 years and turn everything into an underwater theme park. The room erupted into alien babbling. Faculty members whispered urgently to each other. Students chimed, gurgled, and gestured in obvious agitation. But I noticed something else. A few of the faculty members had gone very quiet and were staring at my simple diagram with expressions I couldn't quite read. One of them, the telescope-looking being, slowly raised what I assumed was a hand. Commander, he said in a voice like distant thunder, Perhaps we should run a simulation. The next few minutes were the most entertaining of my entire academic career. Commander Vex, clearly confident that a computer simulation would expose the obvious flaws in my primitive approach, ordered his teaching assistant to input my solution into the Academy's most advanced modeling system. This should only take a moment, he announced with the kind of smug satisfaction usually reserved for people about to prove their annoying relatives wrong at family dinners. The simulation will demonstrate why proper academic rigor is essential for solving complex problems. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a detailed model of the Kepler 442 system. I watched with interest as my simple solution played out in fast forward. Asteroids positioned at the calculated point, the rogue planet approaching in its unstable orbit, gravitational interaction, and the rogue planet went sailing out of the system like a cosmic fastball. The star's magnetic field stabilized. The solar flare stopped. The planetary atmospheres settled back into normal patterns. System saved. Crisis over. Total implementation time 6 weeks. The room went dead silent. Commander Vex stared at the display like it had personally betrayed him. His metallic feathers had gone completely flat, and all 4 of his eyes were blinking rapidly in what I was starting to recognize as the alien equivalent of a blue screen of death. "Run it again," he said quietly. The teaching assistant, a nervous-looking being that resembled a walking stick insect, fumbled with the controls. The simulation ran again. Same result. Again, Commander Vex whispered. Same result. Thymon's crystals had dimmed to almost nothing. His voice came out as a barely audible chime, but the mathematical complexity, the dimensional calculations. "Yeah," I said helpfully. "Turns out you don't actually need 47-dimensional quantum matrices to move something out of the way." Glub's tentacles were writhing in what looked like distress. But systematic aquatic integration has been proven effective across 17 different scenarios. For problems that required turning everything into fish tanks, I pointed out. This problem just needed the space junk removed. Zara was frantically manipulating his controls, trying to find some flaw in the simulation. His forearms moved in increasingly desperate patterns as his over-engineered solution sat next to mine on the display like a broken clockwork universe next to a working slingshot. "There must be variables we haven't considered," he insisted. "Cascade effects, systematic failures, computational errors." "Or," I suggested gently, "maybe sometimes the simple solution is the right solution." That's when Commander Vex started having what I can only describe as an existential meltdown. "This cannot be correct," he muttered, pacing back and forth in front of the display. "Humans are a primitive species. They've only just achieved interstellar travel. They lack the sophisticated cognitive frameworks necessary for advanced problem-solving." One of the faculty members, a being that looked like a walking crystal chandelier, cleared what I assumed was its throat. "Commander," it said carefully, "the simulation appears to be accurate." "No," Commander Vex squawked, his feathers standing completely on end. "Advanced civilizations do not get outsmarted by primitive species using basic physics. This violates fundamental principles of cosmic intellectual hierarchy." I couldn't resist. "Maybe your fundamental principles need an update." The room erupted into chaos. Students were arguing with each other in 17 different languages. Faculty members were frantically checking their own tablets, running their own calculations, and discovering that yes, the stupid human in the back row had actually solved the unsolvable problem. Thymon was making sounds like a crystal wine glass having a nervous breakdown. Glub had started secreting what I hoped was stress water all over his desk. Zara was taking apart his holographic display with all 4 hands like he could manually find the error that would prove me wrong. "This is impossible," Commander Vex kept repeating. "This is absolutely impossible. There must be an error. There must be a flaw. There must be something we're missing." I raised my hand politely. "Commander, would you like me to explain it again? I can use smaller words." The look he gave me could have melted steel. But the damage was done. Every simulation confirmed it. Every calculation verified it. The human in the back row, the one from the primitive species that barely understood quantum mechanics, had solved in 3 weeks what the galaxy's finest minds had been working on for 3 years. And she'd done it by asking the one question apparently no one else had thought to ask. What's actually causing the problem? 3 months later, the Kepler 442 system was saved, exactly as predicted. The Galactic Council had implemented my solution. The rogue planet was now a minor tourist attraction somewhere in the Andromeda shipping lanes, and 15 billion sentient beings were still alive and breathing non-aquatic atmosphere. I was still sitting in the back row. Not because I had to anymore. Oh no, Commander Vex had made several increasingly desperate attempts to move me to the front of the class. But because I'd discovered something wonderful about the back row, it gave you the best view of everyone else making fools of themselves. Miss Punk, Commander Vex said during what had become his weekly attempt to salvage his academic reputation, surely you'd be more comfortable in the front row, where students of your caliber traditionally sit. His voice had lost most of its condescending edge. It's amazing how quickly primitive species becomes innovative thinking when your solution saves 15 billion lives and gets you featured in Galactic Science Quarterly. Thanks, but I'm good back here, I said cheerfully. Great acoustics. What I didn't mention was that the front row would have ruined my perfect view of the daily parade of aliens who now desperately wanted to understand human intuitive methodology. Thyman had been particularly entertaining. His crystals had developed a nervous flicker, and he'd started asking me to check his math on even simple calculations. Last week, he'd spent 45 minutes explaining why his approach to calculating lunch portions required 17-dimensional analysis, then asked if I thought he was overcomplicating things. Glub had become convinced that humans possessed some kind of mystical dry wisdom and kept asking me to solve problems using what he called terrestrial logic patterns. Yesterday, he'd wanted to know if I could apply human thinking to his dating life. I'd told him to try not overthinking it. His tentacles had gone into what I was pretty sure was a grateful wiggle. Zaris was the most fun to watch. He'd become obsessed with primitive efficiency protocols and had started redesigning all his over-engineered solutions to be simpler. His latest project was a transportation device that looked suspiciously like a bicycle with extra arms. But Commander Vex was the crown jewel of my entertainment collection. He'd gone from dismissing human intelligence to frantically trying to understand it, like a person who'd spent their whole life being told the sky was green and then discovered it was actually blue. Miss Punk, he said now, approaching my desk with the careful dignity of someone trying to rebuild their reputation one conversation at a time, I've been thinking about your approach to problem solving. Oh, I said, not looking up from my tablet where I was reading about a new crisis involving disappearing space stations. 3 different alien task forces had already proposed solutions involving temporal displacement, dimensional shifting, and converting everything within 50 light years to antimatter. I was pretty sure someone was just stealing them. Your methodology, Commander Vex continued carefully, appears to involve identifying root causes rather than developing comprehensive systematic responses. Wild concept, I agreed. Yes, well, his feathers ruffled slightly. I've been wondering if you might be willing to, that is, if you would consider, perhaps you could. I looked up at him expectantly. Would you mind looking at a few other problems the Academy has been working on? He finished in a rush. I pretended to consider it. Around the room, alien heads turned toward us with obvious interest. The mushroom next to me had stopped apologizing long enough to listen. Even the reptilian insurance salesman was paying attention, probably hoping I'd need coverage for my upcoming consulting business. Sure, I said finally, but I'm staying in the back row. Commander Vex nodded eagerly. Of course, of course. The back row clearly provides optimal perspective for human cognitive processes. I grinned, plus the view's fantastic. And it was. From the back row, I could see everything. The aliens who'd spent centuries convinced they were the smartest species in the galaxy. now frantically trying to learn from the primitive humans they'd dismissed. The professors who were quietly rewriting their textbooks to include sections on intuitive problem-solving and practical applications of common sense. The whole beautiful irony of a galaxy full of species so advanced they'd forgotten how to think simple. "Oh, and Commander," I added as he turned to go back to his lecture, "that space station problem everyone's working on? You might want to check the maintenance records. I bet someone's been cutting corners on the anchor systems." His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this. Then he practically sprinted to his desk to start making calls. I leaned back in my wonderfully uncomfortable back row seat and smiled. Being the dumb species in a galaxy full of overthinking aliens? Best job ever.